Tom Wilson had always loved the mountains. The city was full of noise, traffic, and people rushing everywhere, but the mountains felt different. They were calm, quiet, and timeless. Tom had grown up near a small town on the outskirts of the city, but he had never really felt at home there. The cabin he had built a few years ago was his escape, a place where he could breathe deeply, think clearly, and just be himself. The cabin itself was modest. It wasn't one of those luxurious log houses you saw in magazines. It was a simple wooden structure with a small porch that overlooked a dense forest of tall pine and oak trees. The windows were clean, reflecting the sunlight during the day, and at night, they glowed softly with the warm light of a few lamps inside. Tom had decorated the cabin simply: a few chairs on the porch, a small table with a lamp, and inside, a comfortable sofa, a small kitchen, and a few shelves filled with books. Tom had spent years working long hours in the city as a graphic designer. The work was creative and fulfilling, but it came with stress. Deadlines, meetings, and constant notifications made him long for a place where he could truly rest. The cabin was that place. He could spend hours reading, drawing, or just listening to the wind rustling through the trees. One Friday evening, Tom arrived at the cabin with his small hatchback packed with groceries and supplies for the weekend. He loved driving up the winding mountain road. The higher he went, the more the noise of the city faded, replaced by birdsong, rustling leaves, and the occasional sound of a distant stream. By the time he reached his cabin, the sun was setting behind the peaks, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. He parked his car and stepped out, stretching his arms. The air smelled fresh and clean. He could hear the faint chatter of birds returning to their nests and the soft hum of insects preparing for nightfall. Tom unlocked the cabin door and stepped inside, feeling a wave of peace wash over him. He placed his bags on the kitchen counter and made himself a cup of coffee, savoring the warmth and aroma. As he stepped out onto the porch with his cup, he noticed how quiet it was. The mountains seemed to hold their breath at that moment, as if welcoming him back. Tom took a deep breath, letting the cool air fill his lungs, and sat down on one of the wooden chairs. He sipped his coffee slowly, enjoying the golden light of the setting sun on his face. For a few moments, everything felt perfect. The stress of the city melted away, replaced by a calm he had not felt in months. He closed his eyes, listening to the sounds of nature: the rustling leaves, the distant call of an owl, and the faint trickle of water from a nearby creek. This was why he came here. This was why he had built the cabin. But the peace didn't last long. As Tom was watching the sun dip behind the mountains, he noticed a movement near the edge of his property. At first, he thought it might be a deer or some other small animal, but then he saw it more clearly: a teenage boy, cautiously stepping through the trees, moving closer to the cabin. Tom frowned. This was unusual. The area around his cabin was mostly private, and visitors were rare. The boy paused, looking around as if he didn't want to be seen. Tom set his coffee down and called out in a calm voice, "Hey there. Can I help you?" The boy froze but didn't answer. He just looked toward the cabin, then back toward the trees, and took a few more steps forward. Tom felt a mix of concern and curiosity. He wasn't angry, he didn't want a confrontation, but he also didn't want anyone wandering onto his property without permission. "Listen," Tom said, standing up slowly. "This is private property. You shouldn't be here." The boy's eyes widened, but he didn't speak. Instead, he turned and ran, disappearing into the forest. Tom watched him go, shaking his head. He wondered who the boy was and why he had come so close to the cabin. Perhaps it was a prank, or maybe he was just lost. Either way, Tom hoped it wouldn't happen again. The next morning, Tom woke up to the sound of birds chirping and sunlight streaming through the windows. He made breakfast, enjoying the quietness of the cabin, and tried to put the previous day's encounter out of his mind. But when he stepped outside to fetch firewood, he noticed footprints near the porch. They were small, teenage-sized, and led from the edge of the trees toward the cabin. Tom sighed. It seemed the boy had been back. This time, there was no sign of him, only the tracks. Tom decided to take a walk around the cabin to see if there were any other signs of trespass. The forest was dense, but he followed the tracks carefully, noting where they went. They stopped at the edge of the creek, then disappeared into the woods. As he walked, Tom thought about how important his cabin was to him. It wasn't just a building, it was a sanctuary, a place where he could recharge and feel safe. He realized he needed to protect it more carefully, even if it meant setting clearer boundaries. Later that day, Tom was sitting on the porch, sketching the mountains in his notebook, when he saw a familiar car coming up the dirt road. It was a small SUV, and it slowed as it approached the cabin. Tom felt a twinge of unease. The driver was a woman, and as she stepped out, she called out his name. "Tom Wilson," she asked, her tone sharp and commanding. "Yes," Tom replied, standing up. "Can I help you?" "I'm Karen Miller," she said. "I live nearby. My son was just near your cabin yesterday. He told me he came by to see if anyone was here. Are you threatening him?" Tom blinked, confused. "Threatening him? No. He was on my property without permission. I asked him to leave." Karen's expression hardened. "Well, I don't think that's fair. My son is a good boy, and I don't want him to be scared." Tom took a deep breath. He didn't want to argue, but he also knew he had to stand his ground. "Karen, I understand you want to protect your son, but this is private property. I just want him to respect that." Karen shook her head and looked at him with a mixture of anger and disbelief. "I think you need to understand how serious this is. I'm calling the police." Tom watched as she got back into her car and drove off, a sinking feeling settling in his chest. He had never had trouble like this before. All he wanted was peace in his little cabin, and now it seemed that was going to be more complicated than he had imagined. That evening, Tom sat on the porch again, staring at the darkening forest. The mountains were still beautiful, the air still fresh, but the peace he had felt before was tinged with anxiety. He knew he had to be careful, but he also knew he couldn't let fear take over. For the first time in a long while, Tom realized that even in the quietest places, life could be unpredictable. And sometimes, protecting what you love required more than just good intentions. It required courage, patience, and a firm belief in what was right. As night fell and the stars appeared in the clear mountain sky, Tom sat quietly, letting the sounds of nature surround him. He knew tomorrow would bring challenges, but he also knew that he would face them. The cabin was his sanctuary, and he wasn't about to give it up. And with that thought, he finally felt a sense of calm return, at least for the night, under the watchful glow of the stars. The next morning, the mountains looked even more beautiful than the day before. The sunlight poured through the trees, casting long golden stripes on the forest floor. Tom Wilson woke up early, as he always did, and stepped onto his porch with a steaming cup of coffee. The air was crisp, carrying the earthy scent of pine and damp soil. For a moment, he allowed himself to forget the previous day's tension. The forest, the mountains, and the quiet cabin all seemed to promise peace. But peace, as Tom was about to learn, could be fragile. Tom was gathering firewood near the back of the cabin when he saw the familiar small SUV coming up the dirt road again. His heart sank. Karen Miller, the woman who had approached him the day before, was back. He wondered if she had come to apologize, but her determined pace suggested otherwise. Karen stepped out of the car, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. Behind her, the boy from yesterday, Ryan, peeked out from the car door, his eyes wide and nervous. Tom's stomach tightened. He didn't like conflict, but he couldn't ignore the situation either. "Tom Wilson," Karen called, her voice firm and slightly sharp. "We need to talk." Tom put down the wood and straightened his posture. "Good morning, Karen. What can I do for you?" His voice was calm, but inside, he felt tension creeping up his spine. Karen took a deep breath. "My son Ryan was near your cabin yesterday. He said he didn't mean any harm, but you yelled at him. He's very upset." Tom frowned slightly. "Karen, I didn't yell at him. I asked him politely to leave because he was on my property without permission." Karen's eyes narrowed. He felt scared. "You need to understand that." Tom nodded slowly. "I do understand, but the rules are the rules. My property is private, and I cannot allow anyone to enter without my consent. I don't want your son to feel scared, but I also need to protect my space." Karen's expression hardened further. "I think you need to take this more seriously. I don't think you understand the consequences of what you did." Before Tom could respond, Ryan stepped forward slightly. He looked nervous, fidgeting with the strap of his backpack. "Mom. I just wanted to see the cabin," he said quietly. Tom looked at him and gave a small, understanding smile. "I get it, Ryan. Curiosity is normal. But you shouldn't sneak onto someone else's property. It can be dangerous here in the forest. There are uneven paths, rocks, and sometimes wildlife. You could get hurt." Ryan's shoulders slumped. He nodded, looking guilty. Karen, however, did not seem satisfied. "I think this conversation is over," she said sharply. "I'm calling the police." Tom felt a lump form in his throat. He had hoped that speaking calmly would resolve the situation, but it seemed that Karen was determined to escalate it. "Karen," he said carefully, "I don't want trouble. But my cabin is private, and your son entered without permission. That's the real issue here." Karen gave a small, frustrated sigh, but she didn't respond. Instead, she got back into her SUV and drove down the dirt road, leaving Tom alone with the early morning sunshine and the distant sounds of the forest. Tom tried to shake off the tension. He told himself that he had done nothing wrong. He had simply asked someone to respect his property. But the encounter left him uneasy. He couldn't stop thinking about what might happen next. Over the next few days, Tom tried to focus on his routines. He went for walks in the forest, drew sketches of the mountains, and spent time reading in the cabin. But every time he heard a car on the dirt road or saw movement near the edge of the trees, his heart would skip a beat. One morning, as he was chopping wood near the porch, he noticed a figure moving among the trees. He froze. This time, it wasn't Ryan. He could tell from the shape and size of the figure. A middle-aged man was standing near the treeline, looking toward the cabin. Tom quickly realized it was one of Karen Miller's neighbors, someone he hadn't met before. The man waved politely and called out, "Good morning. I just wanted to check if everything is all right. I saw some activity around your cabin." Tom nodded. Thank you. Everything is fine. I'm just taking care of the cabin and the property. The man smiled. That's good to hear. These woods can be tricky. You never know when someone might wander by. Tom appreciated the man's friendly tone. It reminded him that not everyone in the area was confrontational. Some people respected boundaries and valued community. Later that afternoon, as Tom was preparing dinner, he heard a knock at the cabin door. He hesitated before opening it, unsure of who it might be. When he opened the door, he found Ryan standing there alone. His backpack was slung over one shoulder, and he looked uncertain. "Hey, Ryan," Tom said gently. "What are you doing here?" Ryan shuffled his feet. I just wanted to say I'm sorry. I didn't mean to cause any trouble." Tom nodded. "I understand. You're just curious, and that's okay. But you can't come here without asking. It's my property, and it's important to be safe." Ryan looked relieved. "I get it. I promise I won't come here again without permission." Tom smiled. "That's all I ask. It's important to respect other people's space. You can enjoy the forest and the mountains without entering someone else's property." Ryan nodded, then turned and walked back toward the forest. Tom watched him go, feeling a sense of relief. Perhaps the situation could be resolved peacefully. But that evening, just as Tom was settling down with a cup of tea, he heard the sound of tires crunching on the dirt road again. He looked out the window and saw Karen Miller driving up once more. His stomach tightened. He had hoped that after the brief conversation with Ryan, things would calm down. Karen stepped out of the car and marched toward the cabin, her expression serious. "Tom Wilson," she said firmly, "we need to discuss this. I've been thinking about what happened, and I don't think you understand how serious this is. I'm filing a complaint with the HOA and possibly the police." Tom took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. "Karen, I've explained the situation. Your son entered my property without permission. I don't want trouble, but I need to protect my space. I'm willing to discuss this calmly, but I won't back down from protecting my property." Karen shook her head. "I think you're making this bigger than it needs to be. I don't want to hear excuses. This is about my son's safety and his feelings." Tom felt frustrated but remained composed. "I understand that, but my cabin is my sanctuary. I cannot allow anyone to enter without my consent. Your son's curiosity doesn't give him the right to trespass." Karen looked like she wanted to argue further, but after a moment, she sighed. "I'll be back with the HOA," she said, getting back into her car. "We'll see what they say." Tom watched the car disappear down the dirt road, feeling a mix of frustration and determination. He knew that the days ahead would not be easy. He had always hoped that his cabin would be a place of peace, but now it seemed that he would need to defend it more than ever. As night fell, Tom sat on the porch, staring at the stars. The mountains were still beautiful, and the forest still whispered its calming sounds. But he knew that peace wasn't always simple to maintain. Sometimes, it required patience, courage, and the willingness to stand up for what was right. For the first time, Tom realized that protecting the quiet sanctuary he loved might mean facing conflict and challenges he had never imagined. He also knew that he couldn't let fear control him. His cabin was his home, and he would defend it, no matter how difficult the situation became. And so, as the wind rustled through the trees and the stars shone brightly above the mountains, Tom Wilson prepared himself for the days ahead. The unexpected visitor had changed everything, but he was determined to protect the quiet, peaceful life he had built in the mountains. A week later, Tom Wilson found himself in a situation he had never imagined. The small, quiet cabin he loved so much had become the center of a legal dispute. Karen Miller, the woman whose son had wandered onto his property, had followed through on her threats. She had filed a complaint with the local homeowners association and threatened to involve the police. Tom had tried to handle things calmly, but now it was clear that the conflict had escalated beyond his control. Tom sat in the waiting area of the small courthouse in town, clutching a folder filled with evidence. Inside were photographs of his property, clear markings of the boundary lines, and pictures of the footprints that Ryan had left near the cabin. There were also videos he had captured on a security camera showing Ryan stepping onto the property without permission. Tom had prepared carefully. He knew he needed to present the facts clearly and calmly. He watched people moving through the courthouse hallway, lawyers, clerks, and other residents. The building was older, with faded paint on the walls and wooden benches in the waiting area. The atmosphere was serious but not intimidating. Tom took a deep breath, trying to calm his nerves. He had faced deadlines and pressure in the city, but this felt different. This was personal. When his name was called, he stood up and followed the clerk into the courtroom. The room was small but formal. At the front, a judge sat behind a large wooden desk, reviewing papers with a serious expression. Karen Miller was already there, sitting beside a small table with her lawyer. Ryan was not present this time, but Tom knew he would be involved if needed. The judge, a middle-aged woman with a calm voice and attentive eyes, looked at both parties. "We are here today to hear the case involving Tom Wilson and Karen Miller regarding a property dispute. Mr. Wilson, please present your side first." Tom nodded and opened his folder. He explained clearly and calmly. "Your Honor, I own a cabin in the mountains. It is private property. On several occasions, Ryan Miller, the son of Miss Miller, entered my property without permission. I asked him to leave politely. I have photographs, videos, and witnesses to confirm this. I never threatened Ryan. I only asked that he respect my property." He showed the judge the photographs of the cabin and the surrounding land, clearly marked with boundary signs. He then played the short video clips showing Ryan walking onto the property. "As you can see, Your Honor, Ryan entered without permission. I am not against children exploring nature, but they should not enter private property. It could be dangerous, and it is not fair to me to have my privacy violated." Karen Miller's lawyer spoke next. "Your Honor, my client's son was exploring and did not intend any harm. Mr. Wilson overreacted and frightened the boy. This caused emotional distress, and we believe Mr. Wilson should be held accountable." The judge listened carefully, nodding occasionally. Tom could feel his heart racing, but he stayed calm. He knew he had the evidence to support his claims. "I respect that, Your Honor," Tom said. "But my concern is safety and respect for private property. No harm was intended, and I did not threaten anyone. I only requested that the rules be followed." The hearing continued for several hours. Witnesses were called. One neighbor, a kind man named Henry, spoke in Tom's favor. "I live nearby," Henry said. "I have seen Mr. Wilson maintaining his property. He is careful and responsible. I have also seen Ryan Miller wandering near the cabin. I can confirm he entered the property without permission." Another neighbor, a woman named Laura, added, "I agree with Henry. Tom has always respected the community, and he only wants to protect his home." The boy was curious, but Mr. Wilson handled it politely. There was no threat, only concern for safety. Karen Miller's lawyer tried to challenge the witnesses, saying their observations might not be accurate. But the judge remained attentive, asking clear questions and making notes. Tom felt a sense of hope. The facts were on his side. During a break, Tom stepped outside the courtroom and took a deep breath. The sun was shining, and the air smelled faintly of pine from nearby trees. He felt nervous but determined. He thought about his cabin, the sanctuary he had worked so hard to build. He realized that he was not fighting out of anger, but to protect something meaningful. When the hearing resumed, the judge asked Tom about his intentions. "Mr. Wilson, can you explain why it is important to you that your property is respected?" Tom thought for a moment before answering. "Your Honor, my cabin is my sanctuary. It is a place where I can think, rest, and connect with nature. I have worked hard to maintain it, and it is my personal space. Allowing someone to enter without permission makes me feel unsafe and disrespected. I am not against children or anyone enjoying the forest, but there must be rules. Property boundaries are important for safety and fairness." The judge nodded. She then turned to Karen Miller. "Miss Miller, what resolution are you seeking in this matter?" Karen Miller looked tense. "I want Mr. Wilson to acknowledge that he overreacted and to take responsibility for scaring my son. I believe he owes compensation for emotional distress." Tom felt a pang of frustration but did not respond angrily. Instead, he remained calm. The judge listened carefully, then asked both sides to submit written statements and evidence. The courtroom clerk explained that a decision would be made after reviewing all materials. After leaving the courthouse, Tom felt a mixture of relief and anxiety. He had presented his case clearly, but he had no idea how long it would take for a decision. Walking back to his car, he looked up at the mountains. The forest still whispered its quiet, calming sounds, but now it also reminded him that life sometimes brought unexpected challenges. Back at his cabin, Tom tried to return to his routines, but the experience left him restless. He checked the perimeter of his property daily, making sure the boundary signs were clear. He spoke gently with the neighbors, ensuring they understood the situation and could help if needed. He also set up additional cameras for security, not because he wanted to watch anyone, but to protect his home. One evening, as the sun set behind the mountains, Tom received a call from the courthouse. The judge had reviewed the evidence and scheduled a follow-up hearing. Tom felt his stomach tighten. He knew that the next steps could determine the outcome of the dispute. The days passed slowly. Tom continued his peaceful routines, but the tension lingered. Each morning, he walked the forest paths, reminding himself of why he loved the mountains and the cabin. Each evening, he sat on the porch with a cup of tea, listening to the wind and the distant call of owls. The natural beauty around him offered comfort, but he knew that he could not ignore the legal battle. Finally, the day of the follow-up hearing arrived. Tom entered the courtroom with calm determination. He presented his statements again, along with all evidence and witness accounts. Karen Miller also presented her side, insisting that her son had been emotionally affected. The judge listened patiently, asking questions to clarify the facts. After several hours, she leaned back in her chair, her expression thoughtful. "I have reviewed all evidence and listened to both parties. I believe this matter involves both property rights and personal boundaries. It is important that children are protected, but it is also important that private property is respected." Tom felt a flicker of hope. The judge continued, "Based on the evidence, it is clear that Ryan Miller entered Mr. Wilson's property without permission. Mr. Wilson acted reasonably by asking him to leave. There is no evidence that he threatened the child or caused harm. Therefore, Miss Miller's claims of emotional distress are not supported by the facts. Furthermore, Mr. Wilson has suffered stress and inconvenience due to repeated visits and false accusations. Karen Miller's face turned pale, and Tom felt a mix of relief and caution. The judge added, "I am ordering that Miss Miller provide compensation to Mr. Wilson for the stress, legal fees, and inconvenience he has endured. The amount will be $50,000, to be paid within 90 days. Additionally, Miss Miller and her son are prohibited from entering Mr. Wilson's property without permission." Tom could hardly believe it. Justice had been served. He felt a wave of relief wash over him. The months of tension, worry, and sleepless nights were finally coming to an end. After leaving the courthouse, Tom walked slowly to his car. The mountains looked peaceful as ever, and the sun shone brightly on the treetops. He felt grateful for the support of his neighbors, for the evidence that had been clear and undeniable, and for the calm, fair judgment of the court. That evening, back at his cabin, Tom sat on the porch and looked out at the forest. The wind rustled gently through the trees, carrying the scent of pine and earth. The sun dipped below the mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Tom took a deep breath, feeling a sense of peace he hadn't felt in weeks. He realized that standing up for what was right didn't have to involve anger or conflict. Sometimes, it meant being patient, careful, and steadfast. And now, his cabin, his sanctuary, was safe once again. Tom sipped his tea and smiled softly to himself. The mountains were quiet, the forest was calm, and he could finally breathe freely again. The legal battle was over, and justice had been served not through anger, but through patience, evidence, and truth. And as the stars appeared in the clear night sky, Tom felt grateful for the peace he had fought to protect. He knew that his sanctuary in the mountains was more than just a cabin. It was a symbol of perseverance, fairness, and the quiet strength of standing up for what is right. The days after the court's decision were quiet but full of emotion for Tom Wilson. Driving back to his cabin, he could feel the tension slowly leaving his body. The mountains stretched before him like a comforting embrace, the trees swaying gently in the breeze. It had been weeks of worry, stress, and uncertainty, but now he could finally breathe. When he reached the cabin, Tom parked his car and stepped out, looking around. Everything seemed unchanged: the same tall pines, the creek nearby, and the forest paths he had walked so many times. Yet, everything also felt different. He had fought for his peace, and now it was officially recognized. The cabin, his sanctuary, was safe again. Tom unlocked the door and stepped inside. The familiar wooden floors and warm light greeted him like old friends. For a moment, he simply stood there, absorbing the relief and satisfaction that came from knowing the truth had been acknowledged. He had not wanted conflict, but he had also refused to allow unfairness to dictate his life. Over the next few days, word spread in the small mountain community about the court's decision. Neighbors who had seen the events unfold expressed their support for Tom. Henry, the man who had been his witness, came by to check on him. "I'm glad the court recognized the truth," Henry said, shaking Tom's hand firmly. "You handled this situation better than most people would have. Calm, patient, and prepared." Tom smiled. "Thank you, Henry. It wasn't easy, but I wanted to make sure everything was done properly. This cabin means a lot to me." Laura, another neighbor, stopped by with a plate of freshly baked cookies. "I wanted to congratulate you, Tom," she said warmly. "It's good to see justice served." You didn't just protect your property, you set an example for the whole neighborhood about respecting boundaries. Tom felt a deep sense of gratitude. The support of the community reminded him that fairness and truth mattered, and that even when conflict arose, there were people who valued honesty and respect. Meanwhile, Karen Miller was struggling to accept the decision. She had initially believed that her son's curiosity justified his actions, and she had not expected the court to rule against her. The judgment of $50,000 for stress, legal fees, and inconvenience came as a shock. For a few days, she avoided Tom, clearly upset and embarrassed. Ryan, on the other hand, seemed confused. He had not fully understood the legal process, only that his actions had caused significant consequences. He came to the cabin one morning, timidly knocking on the door. Tom opened it and saw the boy standing there, eyes lowered. "Hi, Ryan," he said gently. "What brings you here?" Ryan shuffled his feet. I wanted to say sorry again. I didn't mean for anything to happen." Tom nodded. "I know you didn't. Curiosity is natural, but you have to respect other people's property. That's how we stay safe and fair." Ryan nodded slowly. "I understand. I promise I won't come back without asking." Tom smiled softly. "That's all I ask. You can still enjoy the forest and the mountains. You just have to stay on the paths or ask permission." Ryan turned to leave, but then paused. "I hope we can still be neighbors," he said quietly. Tom nodded. "Of course, Ryan. Just remember to respect boundaries, and everything will be fine." As Ryan walked away, Tom closed the door and leaned against it, feeling a mix of relief and hope. He realized that sometimes, people make mistakes, but understanding and patience could still guide them toward better choices. The court decision also brought a sense of closure for Tom. He no longer had to worry about unexpected visits or accusations. His cabin was officially his sanctuary, protected by both the law and his careful attention. He took time to reinforce the property's boundaries, adding a few more signs and ensuring the paths were clearly marked. Not because he wanted to exclude people, but because he wanted to prevent misunderstandings. One afternoon, as he worked on a small garden near the porch, Tom reflected on everything that had happened. The stress of the past weeks was fading, replaced by a sense of accomplishment and peace. He thought about Karen Miller and Ryan not with anger, but with understanding. Conflicts often arose from misunderstandings and differing perspectives. He had faced the situation calmly, respectfully, and honestly, and that approach had worked. Tom also began to notice subtle changes in his community. Neighbors seemed more aware of boundaries, children were reminded to respect private property, and there was a quiet sense of order restored. It was as if the conflict had reminded everyone of the importance of fairness and respect. One evening, Tom sat on the porch with a cup of tea, watching the sun set behind the mountains. The sky was painted with shades of orange, pink, and purple, and the forest below was bathed in soft golden light. The wind carried the familiar scent of pine, and the distant creek gurgled quietly. For the first time in weeks, he felt completely at peace. He thought about the court battle, the stress, and the fear that had crept into his life. But he also thought about the lessons he had learned. Patience, preparation, and calmness could overcome even difficult challenges. Standing up for what was right didn't have to be aggressive or loud. It could be quiet, firm, and grounded in truth. The days that followed were peaceful. Tom continued his routines, tending to the cabin, drawing sketches of the mountains, and enjoying long walks through the forest. He noticed the small joys he had sometimes overlooked: the chirping of birds in the morning, the sunlight filtering through the leaves, and the way the forest seemed to embrace him with each step. Occasionally, he would see Karen Miller or Ryan at a distance, but they kept their distance as well. There were no more confrontations, no angry calls, and no unexpected visits. The judgment had not been about punishment alone, it had been about restoring fairness and boundaries. One morning, Tom received a letter from the courthouse confirming that the judgment had been finalized. The $50,000 was to be paid within the next 90 days. He felt a sense of validation, knowing that the law recognized his rights and the respect he deserved. But more than the money, it was the acknowledgement that mattered most. His cabin, his sanctuary, was respected. Tom decided to celebrate the victory quietly. He invited a few neighbors, including Henry and Laura, for a small gathering at the cabin. They shared stories, laughter, and food, enjoying the simple pleasures of community and friendship. The tension of the past week seemed far away, replaced by warmth and connection. As the evening sky darkened, Tom sat back on the porch, watching the stars appear one by one. He thought about the mountains, the forest, and the small cabin that had been the center of so much stress, yet now was a place of calm and happiness. Tom realized that standing up for what is right often comes with challenges, but the rewards are lasting. His cabin had been tested, and he had proven that truth, patience, and careful preparation could protect what he loved. He also knew that compassion and understanding could guide even those who had made mistakes, like Ryan, toward better behavior. The mountains seemed to hold their breath around him, calm and eternal. Tom felt grateful for his home, his community, and the lessons he had learned. The forest whispered its quiet approval, and the wind carried a gentle reminder that peace is earned, not given. And so, under the soft glow of the stars, Tom Wilson sat quietly on the porch, drinking his tea and smiling to himself. Justice had been served, but more importantly, his sanctuary had been restored. The mountains, the cabin, and the forest remained his, protected by both law and the careful attention of a man who loved them dearly. In the weeks that followed, Tom's life returned to its peaceful rhythm. He continued to care for the cabin, explore the forest, and enjoy the quiet beauty of the mountains. The legal battle had tested him, but it had also strengthened his resolve. He knew that challenges would come again, but he also knew that he could face them calmly, wisely, and fairly. Tom's cabin had been more than a home, it had been a test of patience, courage, and perseverance. And now, with the judgment finalized, he could finally enjoy it fully, knowing that justice, fairness, and respect had been restored. The weeks following the court's decision were quiet and peaceful at last. Tom Wilson walked through the forest near his cabin every morning, breathing deeply and listening to the wind rustle the tall pine trees. The stress and fear that had shadowed him for months were finally gone, replaced by a sense of calm he had not felt in a long time. The mountains, the forest, and the cabin, all of it felt like it belonged fully to him, a sanctuary restored. Tom had spent years building the cabin as his escape from the city's chaos, but now he understood that it was more than just a physical space. It was a place of reflection, of learning, and of growth. The legal battle had tested him, but it had also shown him how important patience, fairness, and calm determination could be. Each morning, Tom started with a simple routine. He would make coffee, sit on the porch, and watch the sun rise over the mountains. The golden light bathed the forest, illuminating the dew on the leaves and casting long shadows on the forest floor. Birds chirped cheerfully, and the distant creek gurgled quietly. Tom felt a deep sense of gratitude. He had fought for his peace, and now he could enjoy it fully. One day, As Tom was tending a small garden near the porch, he noticed Ryan Miller walking along the forest path, keeping a respectful distance. The boy waved tentatively. Tom smiled and waved back. It was a small gesture, but it symbolized an unspoken understanding. Boundaries were respected, and curiosity could be safe when guided by rules. Tom called out gently, "Good morning, Ryan. How are you?" Ryan approached slowly. "I'm good, Mr. Wilson. I just wanted to say thanks again, and I promise I won't enter your property without asking." Tom nodded. "I know, Ryan. Curiosity is natural, but it's important to respect other people's space. You can enjoy the forest, just follow the paths and ask permission if you want to explore more." Ryan smiled faintly and ran back to the main path, leaving Tom standing quietly in the sunlight. He realized that teaching respect and boundaries could be part of living peacefully in the community. The boy had learned a lesson, and Tom had learned one too. Sometimes, patience and understanding were just as important as rules. Over the next few days, Tom focused on repairing and improving the cabin. He reinforced the boundary markers, added a few more signs politely reminding visitors to respect private property, and cleaned up the small paths leading through the forest around the cabin. Each task, though simple, brought him satisfaction. He was protecting his sanctuary in a way that was fair and responsible, and it gave him a sense of control and peace. Neighbors began stopping by more frequently, not out of concern, but out of friendliness. Henry, the neighbor who had testified in court, came over one morning with a basket of fresh fruit. "I wanted to check on you, Tom," he said warmly. "You've handled everything remarkably. The cabin looks great, and it's good to see the peace restored." Tom smiled. "Thanks, Henry. It hasn't been easy, but I feel like life is finally returning to normal." Laura, another neighbor, also stopped by. "We've all learned something from this," she said. "Respect, patience, and understanding are important. Your calm approach set a good example for everyone." Tom appreciated their kindness. The community, once tense with rumors and worry, now felt supportive and connected. It reminded him that peace was not just about property, it was about relationships and mutual respect. One sunny afternoon, Tom decided to take a long walk deeper into the forest. The trails were familiar, yet each time he walked them, he noticed new things: a bird building a nest, a squirrel carrying acorns, the sunlight filtering beautifully through the leaves. He felt connected to nature in a way that was both humbling and comforting. The forest was alive, yet calm, much like his life after the challenges he had faced. As he walked, he thought about the lessons the legal battle had taught him. Standing up for what was right didn't have to involve anger or aggression. It could be done with calmness, preparation, and honesty. He had learned that patience was powerful, that evidence and facts mattered, and that fairness could prevail if approached thoughtfully. Tom also thought about Karen Miller. He didn't feel anger toward her anymore. She had acted out of concern for her son, and although her approach had been flawed, he understood her motivations. In his mind, she was not an enemy, she was someone who had misunderstood the situation. And now, with boundaries clearly established, everyone could coexist peacefully. Evenings at the cabin became a time of reflection and gratitude. Tom would sit on the porch with a cup of tea, watching the sky change colors as the sun set behind the mountains. He could hear the gentle hum of insects, the distant call of owls, and the whisper of the wind through the trees. These quiet moments reminded him why he had built the cabin in the first place: to find peace, clarity, and happiness in the natural world. One evening, As he sipped his tea and looked up at the stars, he reflected on the entire journey. The conflict had been unexpected, stressful, and at times frightening. But it had also brought growth, understanding, and a deeper appreciation for the value of boundaries and respect. His cabin had survived the test, and so had he. The legal battle had also strengthened his sense of community. Neighbors were more aware of the importance of respecting private property, children were reminded to ask before exploring, and relationships were built on fairness and trust. Tom realized that peace was not just an individual pursuit, it was shared and nurtured within a community. Days turned into weeks, and weeks into months. Tom's cabin remained his sanctuary, protected and respected. The mountains continued to offer beauty and calm, and the forest whispered its quiet approval. Life, once disrupted, returned to a steady rhythm of work, reflection, and enjoyment. Tom also began to explore small creative projects in his cabin. He painted landscapes of the mountains, sketched wildlife he saw on his walks, and even wrote short stories inspired by the forest. The experiences he had endured had given him new perspective, and he found inspiration in the lessons learned. One morning, Ryan Miller returned briefly, this time accompanied by his mother. They stayed on the path, a respectful distance from the cabin. Ryan waved, and Tom waved back. Karen Miller spoke softly, "Thank you for your patience, Tom. I understand now, and I appreciate the fairness and calmness you showed." Tom nodded. "I'm glad we can coexist peacefully. Respecting each other's space helps everyone feel safe." Karen smiled faintly and nodded. "Yes, I understand. We'll make sure Ryan stays on the paths and asks for permission in the future." As they walked away, Tom felt a sense of closure. The conflict had been resolved, lessons had been learned, and peace had returned. His sanctuary was safe, and relationships in the community were strengthened. In the weeks that followed, Tom continued his routines, each day filled with quiet joy. He tended to the garden, explored the forest, painted and sketched, and welcomed neighbors as friends. He felt content, not just because the conflict was over, but because he had faced it with integrity and calmness. One evening, as the sun set and the sky was painted with deep orange and purple hues, Tom sat on his porch with a cup of tea. The forest was alive with sounds, yet peaceful. The mountains stretched endlessly, silent witnesses to his journey. Tom took a deep breath and smiled. He realized that peace was not something given, it was something earned through patience, respect, and understanding. His cabin was more than a structure of wood and nails. It was a symbol of perseverance, fairness, and quiet strength. It was a place where he had faced challenges, defended what mattered, and learned the value of calm determination. And as night fell, with the stars twinkling brightly overhead, Tom felt truly at home. The mountains, the forest, and the cabin all were his sanctuary, protected by both law and care. He knew that life would continue to bring challenges, but he also knew that he was ready to face them calmly, wisely, and with fairness. The mountains whispered around him, the wind carried the scent of pine, and the forest stood quiet and eternal. Tom Wilson sipped his tea and smiled, knowing that his sanctuary, his life, and his peace were safe, and that the lessons he had learned would guide him for years to come. For the first time in a long while, he felt completely free. The cabin, the mountains, and the forest were not just a place to escape, they were a place to grow, reflect, and live fully. And in that quiet, endless beauty, Tom found a new beginning.